The global insurance industry is more than a market.
It's a movement powered by 3 million professionals around the world.
Together, we support communities as they rebuild after disaster.
Help businesses through risk and uncertainty.
Protect individuals as they plan for brighter futures.
This impact isn't possible without people.
That's why we attract, grow, and retain the very best talent.
Because when every voice is heard,
When every person feels they belong.
We don't just build careers.
We build a better tomorrow.
Belonging builds tomorrow.
Belonging builds tomorrow.
Belonging builds tomorrow.
Belonging builds tomorrow.
Belonging builds
Belonging builds
Belonging builds tomorrow.
And welcome everyone today, and to those here in the room and also everyone that's online. My name's Michael Neary. I'm the Managing Director for DXC Australia and New Zealand, and we're a technology and insurance processing company. And many of you are our customers, so I thank you for that. It's a pleasure really to begin this session by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, particularly here at Barangaroo, where we're meeting today. And that is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I think Barangaroo is really significant given her role in bringing together people, educating people, and really helping everyone work together. And so that's quite significant, and it's great that this area is named after her. And I pay my respects to all elders, past and present, and all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people who might be with us today. And also I acknowledge those joining us online from very different parts of Australia and pay my respects to their traditional owners and the lands in which you're dialing in from. I'd now like to hand over to Kathleen Warden, CEO of AIG. And it's great, Kathleen, for you to be here, and also Marsh, AIG. We've been together now 8 years, and I'll now hand over to you to move us on with the day. Thanks, Kathleen.
Just one small amendment to that introduction. I am the CEO of AIG Australia. So important amendment there. Thanks so much, Michael, for that beautiful acknowledgement of country. As Michael mentioned, the Global Dive-In Festival is dedicated to promoting culture and talent, and AIG alongside Marsh have been proud global sponsors, and alongside DXC as a local sponsor have been partnering and collaborating on this event for a long time. 8 years is a long time, I think. Now in the 11th year, Dive-In continues to bring together industry leaders and professionals from around the world to explore how prioritizing belonging in the workplace helps attract, retain, and maximize talent, driving innovation, resilience, and long-term business success. I love this year's theme, and I don't think anybody could argue against it, right? Belonging builds tomorrow. It puts a spotlight on the role that every organization and everyone in every organization plays in creating environments where people feel valued, they feel heard, and able to succeed. I'm pleased to open our session today for this reason, and we're pleased to have received a significant number of registrations, our best in the 8 years, 1,000 registrations for people that will be watching today with us, or the live recordings, or sorry, the recordings, which will not be live. Our panel, the reason why we're all here today, will bring a practical discussion. We're going to explore the complexities of ADHD as it presents in adults, especially within the professional environment, like the insurance sector. Our experts will dive into the often invisible effort of masking how individuals with ADHD adapt to fit traditional workplace expectations, and the impact this has on their well-being and productivity. Whether you are navigating ADHD yourself or managing a neurodiverse team, this session will provide valuable insights and strategies for creating more inclusive workplaces. For those of you who need to top up your CPD this year, we are accredited with 1 CIP, so you've got that extra benefit in there as well. Ella, who has partly introduced herself, but she's going to moderate our panel discussion today as well. She's a mental health, well-being, and personal injury subject matter expert, dedicated to improving mental health within Australian workplaces. As the well-being, health, and safety manager for the Pacific region at Marsh McLennan, Ella supports the business in creating psychologically safe environments. Thank you. Through the development and implementation of policies, early intervention initiatives, and leadership training. With a Bachelor of Psychology honors from the University of New England and currently pursuing a Master's in Business Psychology at the University of Newcastle, Ella combines her extensive experience in workers' compensation and occupational rehabilitation and her education in psychology and rehabilitation counseling. So we've got, along with Ella, a stellar lineup of experts today in this field who are all happy to share their lived experience. And with that, I'll leave it with Ella to introduce the panel.
Wonderful. To get us started today, what I'd really like to do is actually throw across to our wonderful panel and ask them firstly, what led you to, I guess, focus on ADHD in the work that you do currently? So Juliette, I might start with you if that's okay.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be speaking here today at the Diagnoses Festival. I guess my interest in ADHD was sparked by a phone call several years ago. My daughter phoned me and announced she'd been diagnosed with ADHD. But then she added, "But Mum, you're the poster child for it." And I laughed because I thought she was being facetious. Well, it took the subsequent diagnosing psychiatrist about 30 minutes to throw his arms up in the air, literally, and say, "Juliette, you are very, very obviously ADHD." And I guess my first reaction actually was more of a question. If my ADHD was so obvious, how had it been missed for so many decades? And this is what I was seeing in parallel in my clinical work. I had women in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, even their 70s coming in who were being late diagnosed with ADHD. So this propelled me into a PhD because I wanted to find out what was going wrong with our communication and how could we fix this. So I'm currently undertaking a PhD in identity recreation, which is quite interesting in terms of how one perceives one's strengths and weaknesses after a late diagnosis. So that's quite important in your career setting. In terms of my business consultancy work, I had a lot of clients coming in who were burning out, and this was really disappointing because they were getting, doing all the preliminary work, getting to middle management, kaboom, out they've gone. So I undertook an MBA in AI and contemporary leadership. I wanted to understand more about burnout and employee retention. Where are we going wrong with this communication? What do we need? So I started Sapien Cognition, and I've been working on the ADHD 180 training program for the last few years, looking at taking what's essentially a first aid kit into corporate setting, looking at supports, and making sure that people with ADHD don't end up burning out just when they need to, get into that really good part of their career. And I'm really pleased to announce that Ewan is now joining me in presenting the ADHD 180 training program. So that's basically how I got into ADHD.
Which is a lovely segue to Ewan. Yeah. Tell us how you sort of got involved in this work.
Well, I have ADHD myself, and I didn't know until I actually injured my back rowing in high school. I'd had many injuries before. I'd usually been able to work around them though, keep active, keep training in some capacity. But this time, when I injured my back, it was so severe, I was actually struggling to walk, and I couldn't do any kind of training. There was sort of no workaround. And I'd always had problems in sort of focus and organization and hyperactivity and things like that. But after this injury, when I couldn't keep training, it just became 10 times worse. And after months of this, just went to mum and I was like, something's not right. We need to see a doctor. Down track, ended up at a psychiatrist, and I was diagnosed with ADHD combined type when I was 16. And much like Juliette, I was sort of like, why wasn't I diagnosed earlier? Why is this missed? And my psychiatrist had a very simple response. It was copious amounts of exercise. At the time, I was training at least 4 hours every day. I was usually doing 3 to 4 sports at a time. I was doing an enormous amount of exercise. And that is one of the key things that sparked my interest in exercise and the use of exercise for improving health and performance. That led me to do a degree in exercise physiology and with honors looking into this area. And now I'm doing a PhD looking at exercise in adults with ADHD. However, despite doing all my research and clinical work, which I do love and I'm very passionate about, I always felt there was something sort of a bit missing because in my early days of clinical work, I really found it quite challenging. There was very high demands for my clinical work, and there wasn't a lot of great support, and it felt like something was sort of missing on that front. And I felt like the workplace was the crucial difference between sort of thriving and surviving and just burning out, because we spent like 40 hours a week at work, right? So when I first started working with Juliette, and I learned of her experience as a business consultant and a mental health therapist, I was like, this is the perfect combination. And it was the perfect way to sort of help support and address some of the things that I had faced and the challenges that I'd had in the workplace. And that's when we sort of worked together and learned about the ADHD 180 training program, which I'm now involved with in module 4, because I'm really keen and passionate about this space. And the aim is to help managers, employees, everyone in the workplace to create a better environment so that people with ADHD don't have to go through some of the experiences I did that were not great and generated an enormous amount of stress and a lot of mental health problems and really compromised my productivity as well. So that's how I got into the space.
Remarkable at age 16 that you had the insight to sort of say, Mum, I think there's something happening here, help me. Yeah, fantastic. And Kim, I'll throw to you as well.
Yeah, so I'm a psychologist and I have my own private practice as well as NeuroAM. I only got diagnosed with ADHD last year, despite diagnosing clients myself and helping clients, which feels a bit ridiculous, doesn't it? But we can really mask, and I didn't even realize I was masking. So I think even when I was a kid, I was pretty anxious, and I was a super high performer, crazy perfectionist. I was the nerd at the front of the class, like putting my hand up all the time, you know, just wanting to please. So I think that stopped it from being noticed. And the hyperactivity, you think about a little boy being really disruptive and bouncing around the classroom. I think that's the image we conjure up when we think of ADHD. For me, I was high performing, but in here, I couldn't switch it off. You know, that was going all the time. So when I was a teenager, I was diagnosed with anxiety and treated as such. And over time, I was sitting there with clients and they were talking about their experiences. And I thought, well, you know, I'm just really empathizing with them. And it turns out that empathy was actually me recognizing a lot of what they were sharing in myself. So I finally went through the diagnosis, and it was like finding out about a bridge of something I didn't even know I needed to cross. Like, it was a very illuminating moment, but I also went through considerable grief because my whole life, I'd felt like I was just too much and I was really anxious and I just need to get it together. And, you know, so it can be quite an experience for anyone that's been diagnosed with, you know, a neurodivergent condition. Yeah, and I also felt silly because I thought I'm a psychologist, I should have known. You know, we can be really hard on ourselves. But now, you know, it's been so good to find out. I feel like I've got the guidebook for my brain, and that's then manifested in me, I think, being a better psychologist, you know, in my having my lived experience, and also established NeuroAM with my co-founder, Roanne, who's ADHD. Who's an amazing person, and we wanted to go in and not just look at helping people, but actually changing the systems, which tend to be really set up by and for neurotypical people, to help change those systems at a broader level. So to work with organisations to help all brains thrive. And it doesn't mean that you've got sort of, you're either neurodivergent or you're neurotypical. We all have different brains, whether you fit a diagnostic criteria or not. We all have different ways we like to communicate and get feedback and give feedback and ways of learning. So if you create a truly inclusive environment where that's a conversation that you're having with each and every person, and there's the psychological safety to do so, you know, the studies show, like, performance, engagement, all of the things you want are maximized. There's no downside to it. So, you know, helping organizations get on board, and some are more amenable to that than others, but we're on the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a really lovely segue into our next question, which, you know, there's a lot of misconceptions out there about ADHD. And I want to take us back to the basics for a second. So Juliette, if you wouldn't mind, can you explain to us exactly what is ADHD? What should we be looking out for?
Sure. So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Research tells us that you're born with it, and it's referred to as a neurodevelopmental disorder. Effectively, it affects how we regulate two brain neurotransmitters, dopamine and noradrenaline. Dopamine helps us to perceive reward in tasks. Okay, it helps us to focus and plan. Noradrenaline, we look at vigilance, attention, and executive function. ADHD affects certain parts of the brain, so the prefrontal cortex for focus and planning, your basal ganglia for motivation and action, your hippocampus for memory, which is why sometimes you go blank, and your amygdala for emotional regulation. We also know it's got a high genetic component. So if you have it, chances are one of your parents may have it or your children may have it too. We also know it is not related to attitude, competency, or willpower. So there's 3 possible diagnoses. You can be diagnosed with inattentive ADHD, impulsive hyperactive ADHD, or a combination of the 2. From a business perspective, ADHD costs the Australian economy about $20 billion a year. So it affects things like productivity, staff absenteeism, the general well-being of your staff, your organisational culture as well. I call it the condition of inconsistency. And that's how I refer to it with my clients, because you essentially, especially if you don't know you've got it, every day can be different and you don't know why. You're just inconsistent. How can it show up? Well, if you've got hyperactive, impulsive ADHD, you're going to be more noticed. You're going to be chopping and changing from things. You might have high energy. You might talk quickly. You may interrupt people. You may have road rage. You may not like standing in queues. You may be, anyone got road rage? No. You might talk too much or even interrupt people in a conversation. You can't help it. You'll interrupt because you're thinking very quickly. You may be emotionally impulsive and feel overwhelmed for no good reason as well. Now, if you've got inattentive ADHD, it's more subtle. And this is where a lot of women aren't being diagnosed because they're daydreaming. They're not focusing. They're making careless mistakes. They're getting overwhelmed. They might be forgetful, appear distracted. And again, it's not an attitude. This is something to do with brain chemistry. With ADHD, you may also not want to pay your bills because bills require dopamine, and dopamine is how we perceive reward in tasks. I don't know anyone who perceives reward in paying bills, for instance. You may not be able to read a book, watch a movie. You may have time blindness. No matter how hard you try to get out in the morning on time, for some reason, 20 minutes disappeared. You may feel terrible overwhelm one day when you wake up, have brain fog due to hormonal fluctuations. You may have RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, where we have a perceived reaction or sense of rejection from people, which isn't there. There are some good things. Okay, there's some good things, and these can be managed. So I want to clarify that. Incredible hyperfocus means that on certain days we can focus for hours at a time. Sometimes it's bad because you'll sit down to do something and then you look up and the sun has gone down and you think, oh, I didn't eat or drink either. Creativity, out of the box thinking, incredible resilience. So long as we're managing our ADHD at home and we're doing things, there's no reason that we can't be our best in a workspace. I want to mention burnout though, because this is important. Burnout, if we're not managing our ADHD at home, if we're not looking at our sleep hygiene, our diet, our exercise, meditation, how we regulate and staying on top of things, and we bring that into our workplace, you're on the back foot the minute you get into your workplace, and your workplace is not going to function properly, and you're going to take all of that back home again, and you're going to end up feeling really overwhelmed. And we know that when we get to a certain point of overwhelm, that's when we burn out. We also chase dopamine. We can make dopamine through diet, through exercise, doing pleasurable activities. Doom scrolling, spending too much money, maybe being a bit impulsive. That's our, if you're lying in bed at night and you're on your phone and you're doom scrolling, you're just dopamine hitting. I know there's someone in there who might be doing that. The good news. So we can effectively manage ADHD. This is really important. We get onto meds. We get onto these scaffolding strategies. There's no reason why any of those traits need to affect you. You can manage it perfectly. And then you get to work, you're going to be feeling at your best and performing at your best as well.
Yeah. Love the idea of us leveraging our strengths, right? Kim, as a member of the Late Diagnosis Club, can you share how common ADHD diagnoses are amongst adults and why are we seeing more late diagnoses?
Yeah, it's a question that's asked a lot. And I'll have arguments with people that are like, oh, are we over-diagnosing? Someone said to me the other day, is it even a thing? Is it even really a thing? Is it just society is just making us not be able to pay attention? Which is reasonable because I think we're all quite frenetically paced and pulled in a million directions. But in terms of statistically, so they estimate 2.5 to 3.5% of the population is diagnosed with ADHD, but when you try and capture those that are likely undiagnosed, you're looking at up to 6 to 7%, right? Which is a lot. In terms of why is there more now, it's because more is being diagnosed now because we're starting, like me, to recognize symptoms. Yes, it's on TikTok and Instagram, and that's what's brought many clients to me. Like I saw it on TikTok, so we can giggle at that, but you know, it's a mode of people finding out about it. I think also in terms of women getting diagnosed later in life, it's often when they have some sort of fracture point. So that's either like perimenopause or menopause. Once you start to get the estrogen going up and down, estrogen's not just a sex hormone, it also affects all aspects of your brain and that executive function. Having a child be diagnosed, you know, going through a breakup, having burnout. Often it's one of those points where it really gets in the way of their function. Also in terms of, you know, like I said, masking for women, that for little girls, hopefully it's changing now, but I was always told, be a good girl, you know, be quiet. I was always being told to be quiet. I still haven't learned that, but, you know, and so would internalize a lot of this. So it was missed, you know, and I found as a woman, now that I'm in my 40s, don't love the wrinkles, but one of the things I love the most is I give less F's. It's really nice. Like you start to embrace who you are more, and you stop trying to make yourself small and be who you are. And so that can result in you saying, hey, I actually am having these difficulties. I'm going to do this for me and seek out the diagnosis. So it's a good thing.
Yeah. Also a member of the Noisy Girl Club.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about how exercise helped you to manage your symptoms pre-diagnosis. Can you talk a little bit more about how exercise can be really useful?
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned earlier by Juliette, in ADHD, dopamine and noradrenaline systems are affected. And this affects many areas of the brain. And there's too many to go into in too much detail. But especially the prefrontal cortex and the basal ganglia. So many of you probably have heard when you exercise, we release a hormone called adrenaline. And adrenaline increases our energy production and it redirects blood flow to the regions of the body that we need that extra blood and that energy. However, when we exercise, we also get an increase in noradrenaline and dopamine. And this is exactly what we need, especially in ADHD. So those increases in noradrenaline and dopamine leads to increases in activity in those regions of the brain that are most affected in ADHD, like the prefrontal cortex and the basal ganglia. It improves function in the amygdala as well, for example. And the downstream effect of this is that we get reductions in symptoms. We get improved focus, improved attention, but also improvements in executive functions. So the improved ability to regulate yourself, to be sort of more organized, prioritize, and transition between tasks, and also be less distractible as well. So the good news is, after we exercise, even though adrenaline drops in the body quickly, noradrenaline and dopamine actually stay elevated in the brain for hours. So the effect we get from exercise actually lasts for hours in the brain, and can even last up to a day. So yeah, after a bout of exercise, we get a big improvement, but that's an acute effect, right? That's the immediate effect that you get sort of during and straight after a bout of exercise. The great news is, if we do exercise regularly, we get a host of other benefits beyond that just acute, immediate effects of exercise. And that's in part because we actually get a release of a whole host of chemicals that facilitate something called neuroplasticity. So when we exercise, especially at moderate to high intensities or for longer durations, there's a few chemicals that we commonly release. So one of them is called insulin-like growth factor 1, IGF-1 commonly known, vascular endothelial growth factor. I know I'm throwing a lot of science at you here, which is often known as VEGF. But there's also the very commonly known one, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. And what these chemicals and these molecules do is they actually stimulate the growth of new brain cells, the formation of new connections between brain cells, and the growth of new blood vessels in the brain. And this actually helps get oxygen and resources to the regions of the brain where we need it most. So what that means is our baseline brain function actually starts to improve. So our baseline improves, our symptoms improve at baseline as well. So that's before you even get the acute effects of exercise. So exercise is a double whammy in terms of the benefits. There's also another type of exercise. So far the mechanisms I've talked about have related to sort of aerobic and resistance exercise, resistance being like weights and things like that. But there's another type of exercise that's also been shown to be quite effective and sometimes more effective than things like cardio and weights. And that's balance and dual task training. So dual task training usually involves some kind of motor task and a cognitive task. Often the motor task is a balance task. And that's simply because a certain part of the brain is used a lot in balancing called the cerebellum. That's a part that's affected in ADHD and important for things like focus. So a simple example is if you're standing on one leg and you count down from 107s, if you have a crack at that, you might be surprised by how hard that is. It's actually oddly difficult. But the good news is this is actually, you don't have to go to a gym, you don't have to get sweaty. It's very easily accessible and you don't need all these other resources and all sort of stuff. And we see significant improvements in brain function. All you need is balance, like literally balance and a bit of focus. And it's a perfect candidate for the work environment. And what I call corporate movement strategies, which is something we cover in module 4, the ADHD 180 training program. But generally supporting and prioritizing exercise and movement in the workplace is one of the most easily accessible and effective strategies we have available to us, and creating a culture that supports that because it improves well-being and productivity and reduces burnout.
So no permission slip to skip gym day then?
Unfortunately not.
Okay, thanks, Ewan. Juliette, I'm going to throw to you now. You see a lot of people in clinic with ADHD. What does masking at work look like for individuals? And can you give us a bit more detail?
Okay, so masking is all about how we hide or suppress our ADHD symptoms so that we can meet expectations and avoid negative judgment. I use the analogy of the duck paddling under the water, because often a person with ADHD will look very calm on the outside, but underneath they're paddling furiously to maintain this mask. And we have to remember that anybody in a workplace can have ADHD, so there may be multi-layers of masking going on, which does create quite a complicated dynamic when you start looking at it. So an example of masking might be someone who's given a complicated task to do, and they smile and they say yes, and the person says, "Have you understood?" "Yes, absolutely, yes." And it's got multi, parts of it. "Have you sure you've understood?" "Yeah, I've understood everything." And they walk off and think, "Oh, gee, I lost focus at the beginning there. I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing." But am I going to go back to that person and say, "Can we actually just go through that again point by point? And I'll just make some notes." No, they don't. They don't. They go away and they paddle and paddle and paddle, and they're furiously trying to figure out what's going on. All at the same, wearing this mask of complete competency, and that can lead to absenteeism. And it can also lead to just not meeting deadlines. Also with promotions, got to be really careful with masks. Someone may feel like we are, competent for a promotion, we go for it, but we really haven't thought through what it entails, and so we wear that mask of competency. And then I see a lot of people burning out after those promotions because they just haven't thought things through and they put on that mask. If you're a manager, you may start delegating. You might have a day where you feel really overwhelmed, so you start delegating and you're not following who you're giving tasks to. So you put the mask on, you're not going to go up to someone and say, "I have no idea what's going on today. I've just been handing out, tasks to everybody." So that's another example of where shame may result in you maintaining a mask. One of the big ones is in a meeting. You might go in and see everyone else is sitting still, but your foot wants to do this. And we know that when people with ADHD are moving like this, it actually improves memory. But what I'm going to be doing is saying, "Stop, stop, keep still, keep still, keep still." I'm going to get to the end of the meeting, and what I remember about that meeting is keep still. I haven't heard anything because I've had to control my foot, right? It happens. It happens. Another thing during meetings or even in conversations is with ADHD, sometimes you can blurt out things in a very raw way because you're keeping up with your thoughts, and you can wear a mask of silence because you feel like you may not sound competent if you're coming out with these raw kind of thoughts on the go. So that's another way a mask can appear. Rejection sensitive dysphoria are perceived rejection. So someone might give me a funny look and I go, "Oh, that person doesn't like me, but I'm going to pretend they like me, but I'm going to avoid them." All right. So that can be a mask as well, is with the rejection sensitive dysphoria. We might not speak up. So someone says, "Are you good?" You say, "Yeah, I'm fine." You don't want to say, "But my desk is noisy. There's sun shining on my face." You go to review meetings, you're wearing the mask. I want to be competent. I don't want to admit that I'm struggling. So I'm going to say that I'm competent. And so things tend to snowball. And that mask, that's what gets very, very heavy. It's the mask. It's exhausting. That's when you're going to go home. You're going to drop that mask and you might reach for a drink or two, and you might start eating, and you might start doing things that try and make you feel better in order so the next day you put the mask on and you come in again. We want to avoid that. So essentially what we do, we go in and do basically a SWOT analysis, you know. What is actually going on? Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? What do you need help with? Let's just get it out into the open. It's not a big deal. Let's deal with it. And that way, you basically walk into work and you're productive. You're productive. You can leave the mask. You do not have to mask. Yeah.
Thank you. I think masking obviously often stems from a sense of or a lack of safety. So Kim, I'm going to throw to you. What can workplaces do to sort of foster that sense of safety and make people feel a bit more comfortable disclosing their neurodiversity?
Yeah, I mean, I think disclosure doesn't even necessarily have to be a part of it. Some people just don't want to disclose, and that's okay. I think it's more broad. If you have an inclusive, a truly inclusive workplace, it is just having those universal conversations about what do you need to succeed? How do you best learn? How are you with feedback? How do you like to be recognized? You know, I have coaching clients that when they do something good, they want a marching band, you know, and others, the thought of that, of being shouted out in front of the group would make them cry, you know, but assuming that everyone operates the same or operates like us, we have a bias. We think everyone thinks like us. We just naturally do, you know, so taking the time to embed that. Generally, when we work with organisations, we'll do some psychometrics around assessing what's actually happening, like anonymous surveys. And then it will either be, it's probably all of these, but policy issues, leadership issues, culture issues. If it's just policy, that's the easy one. You know, you can go in and change policy and get that out there. But if it's cultural, like if there's a lack of psychological safety, if there's leadership issues, you know, I was speaking to a CEO the other week about NeuroAmp, and I said, oh, it might be really good for your organisation. He goes, I pay people to come in and do a job. And if they're not going to have their bums on the seat between 8 and 5 and do the job, then don't be here. I'm like, cool. All right. So you're going to be a big client of ours. I'll send you some info. So some people aren't going to come to the party, but I think going, looking at universal design across the organisation rather than, you know, individual accommodations. I think going away from this idea of accommodations and we just design an environment where we set each and every person up for success. One thing that can be feared by organisations and leaders, if we ask everyone what do they need, it's going to open the floodgates, you know, and they're just going to ask for all the things. That doesn't happen. People are just happy to be asked and to have that conversation. People are reasonable. You know, they want to do good work generally. You might have your occasional person that doesn't, but, you know, I think just bringing that as part of the conversation, and having practical workplace design shifts as well, you know, written and verbal instructions, flexible deadlines, fewer back-to-back meetings. Whoever feels like they're in back-to-back meetings.
Yep.
More of you than that. Was one hand up the back. Oh, sorry, you're all cruising through life. I mean, I preach this stuff and I still find myself in back-to-backs. For any brain, it is not good to bounce from one meeting to the next. You find yourself by the, I don't know about you, maybe you're all having a great time, but I'll find myself just a ball of stress and I'm not switched on. So things like that, and how you do that at an organizational level doesn't have to be completely reinventing the wheel, but these changes, huge difference, huge difference.
Yeah, I love the idea of asking people what they need. I think
totally,
it's the easiest and most straightforward way to get the change that you need to happen. Yeah, lovely. Ewan, I'm going to throw to you now. In your work focusing on exercise, what links do you see between masking and things like burnout and fatigue and overall physical health as well?
Yeah, so as everyone sort of has just heard, masking is very tiring and stressful. And if you're masking and you're tired and you're stressed, then you're going to become less productive. And if you're less productive, then you have to do longer hours. And it just becomes this cycle that just repeats itself and it builds up over time. And we know that chronic stress is bad for your health and burnout is bad for business. So we really need to avoid this. And we need to reduce the need to mask. So as I'm sure you can all guess, exercise is great in general. Exercise is a great tool for the job. It can improve brain function, mental performance, and usually, but not always, it can significantly reduce masking, but it's not the be all and end all, but it's a great tool. And because there's less masking that's needed, then there's less stress and fatigue that's created from the masking that is done as well. But also exercise just directly helps your ability to regulate your emotions, manage stress, improve your mood, and also obviously improve your physical health. And clearly people who do exercise regularly experience lower rates of things like depression, burnout, and less fatigue. And we know that if someone is healthier and happier and full of energy, they're more productive and have a better quality of life. So however, there is another way in which movement helps ADHD, and that's as a self-regulation tool. And the great thing is it's one of the most effective tools we have available to us. And it's also basically the cheapest, the most easily accessible. So there are several studies showing that during movement, as Juliette mentioned, during movement, such simple things like walking and fidgeting, our mental performance is actually improved in ADHD. So we really want to actually avoid telling people to sit still. If you tell someone with ADHD to sit still and then pay attention, you're shooting yourself in the foot. It's not going to work, right? So what we want to do and what we want to make sure we're doing is finding ways to facilitate work appropriate movement so that they can actually focus on work and not on sitting still. So there's some simple examples that I've got for you. The first is if you have restless legs, if I'm bouncing my leg like this, that might shake a little table and that gets annoying. And if you've got a bunch of tables crammed together and they're all back to back, then if I shake one table, it might shake the others and then everyone else gets annoyed, right? There's wonderfully simple solutions to this. You just pull the desks apart a little bit, right? And a lot of people forget such simple things. You can also just slip a bit of fabric between the tables and that reduces how much it transfers. Or you can just have that person in a slightly different position, or you can give them a fidget toy. Don't give people clicker pens though. Everyone hates the clicker pens, right? I don't know anyone who loves it when someone's going click, 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 click. It drives everyone insane. So
spinning mine instead of clicking.
Exactly. So that's a great example, right? Using certain tools, certain pens, for example, that you play with, but you don't click them, right? So that's one example. But another one is simply having walking breaks as well. Like walking breaks and fidgeting tools are really good, and having a culture and environment that sort of facilitates that. Flexible working arrangements are another one. If it's easier for someone to be active throughout the day or to move more freely at home and they don't have to worry about having to sit still, that also helps as well. And for some people, being able to start a little bit later or finish a little bit earlier and start earlier instead, or go to the gym in the middle of the day, whatever it happens to be, that can be a really good way to use movement and exercise to facilitate performance, instead of forcing them to have to do it early in the morning or in the evening, which might not be the best times for them. So the most crucial thing outside those sort of practical strategies is a culture shift. You need to have a culture shift that is very supportive, has a supportive and facilitating sort of attitude towards physical activity and movement. If you don't have that, you're going to really compromise the quality of life and the overall health and performance of your team. And with a culture shift, as you sort of mentioned, a lot of people were very concerned that there's going to be a lot of effort and time and cost. It's usually the opposite. It's actually makes everything easier. Usually it facilitates productivity and everything runs more smoothly. So you really need the culture shift. But I do want to highlight, exercise is amazing, but exercise alone is not a magic bullet, right? It's not the only thing that is needed. It's a really good pillar and foundation. But we need to adopt other tools and other strategies. We need to be more accepting of people so that they can reduce masking strategies and masking in the workplace. We also need to make sure we're properly and effectively implementing tools like AI, because exercise is great, but a lot of people sometimes will latch onto that being like, oh, that's easy. We'll dump that all on the individual and it's their responsibility. But we also need other strategies to support people in the workplace. So supporting and facilitating movement strategies, it's really cheap, effective, easily accessible, and it's really important for creating an inclusive work environment where everyone can be more productive and effective, and also for retaining the best talent.
Fantastic. I'm going to keep with you, Ewan, for a second.
Oh, you're going to keep with me?
Yeah. For individuals who struggle with motivation or routine because of ADHD, how can we create those routines and exercise to become a bit more accessible?
Absolutely. So I'm going to go right out and just give you a number of strategies and approaches and frameworks, just to keep it very practical and efficient and effective. So the first is addressing the all or nothing mindset and the sort of fear of failure that often comes with that as well. A lot of people with ADHD, we get very motivated and ambitious, and we're like, we create this awesome plan, we can do all this exercise and everything. And then when it comes to doing it, when we're not in as good of a state, we go, oh, I can't do all that. I just won't do anything, because we're worried that if you do part of it, we often have rejection sensitive dysphoria. We're very sensitive to failing, right? And reframing that is really important. Is a really important strategy to facilitate your ongoing motivation and engagement and embedding it in part of your routine. And there's a common technique that's used in concepts from psychology called behavioral activation. And neither of you, please don't butcher me if I get this at all wrong. The general concept of it is that action is actually what creates motivation, not the other way around. And what we want to do is we want to basically create small wins so that you have lots of little wins between the end goal. You still want to get to the end goal, but we create small wins along the way, and that actually builds momentum. It's commonly used in depression as well, for example, to improve mood. Small actions then build motivation and improve mood. So changing that all or nothing mindset to have graded wins in between and use that sort of behavioral activation approach. The next is something called self-determination theory. So some of you might have heard of this. And this is a framework for motivation that is actually been investigated in ADHD as well and found to be a useful tool. And the framework essentially says there's three main pillars of motivation. The first is what they call relatedness, which is the social aspect. Are you doing it with people? Are you having fun? Is there relationships involved that are positive? The second is competence. So are you good at it or are you getting better at it? Because let's be honest, no one wants to do something they suck at and they're not getting better at, right? It's just called an unpleasant experience. And then the third is autonomy. How much control do you have over what you're doing? And you don't need all three. If you can get all three, that's great. But at least trying to hit two. And it's a very good way of thinking about something. If you're not motivated to do something, you can ask yourself, okay, am I hitting any of these points? If I'm not getting better at it or I'm not good at it, that's not going to be very motivating. If I'm doing it on my own, but I want it to be social, that's probably not going to help either. And if it's something that I don't get a lot of choice over, I go and do a default thing, it's probably not going to help either. So it's a simple framework that you can use quickly to assess why am I not motivated, and then deliberately take approaches that leverage those. The third is another concept. It's a phenomenon from the research that is really quite important around motivation and long-term adherence and routines. And when we study the effects of, study what's called affect during exercise or physical activity, which is your emotions, how you feel, we find that how you feel during physical activity is actually quite a good predictor of whether or not you'll be doing it long term, like 6 to 12 months later. How you feel after exercise or after physical activity has almost no predictive power. So a lot of people talk about you want to feel good after you work out, and that's great. That is one of the big benefits of exercise. It's a really important part of why we use it to treat depression. But in terms of that as an adherence component, the crucial thing is that you're actually enjoying it during it. You enjoy the activity itself, and that's more important for the long-term adherence. The last thing is kind of a little bit related to the first one, and it's about how we integrate physical activity and exercise. So a lot of people, especially a lot of people with ADHD, if they do get a good routine, they figure out a routine and a schedule that works for them, then they want to start exercising. And a little bit like the first one, they go all or nothing. And they're like, full send, I'm going to like overhaul my life and just like completely change everything. And in the process, what they do is they completely remove all these routines and systems and scaffolds they have in place that have been actually working quite well for them. And they lose all these processes that were beneficial to them. And then all of a sudden, they're struggling. It's difficult for them to be motivated to do the exercise. Their routine isn't great anymore. And it creates all these problems. So we don't want to do a massive overhaul. We want to integrate exercise into your lifestyle. So we actually want to go through and think about practically where you can fit things in. And just start small and find out where you can put it into an established habit or routine. And this is commonly known as habit stacking. There's a bit more nuance to that sort of stuff. But when you put a new behavior right after a very established habit, then we actually improve our ability to reinforce and maintain and sustain that behavior. And it means we don't have to overhaul our whole routine and schedule and things that are working well for us. And the crucial thing about this is it also reduces the mental effort and the executive function demands. We have challenges with motivation and energy levels and executive functions in ADHD, and we really want to minimize any additional demands on our executive functions. So that's also another strategy. But there are many more effective strategies. Those are just some practical ones I wanted to give you right out the gate so that you had some takeaways that you can use right away to help you with that. Yeah, hopefully those can help you build some sustainable routines and help with your motivation.
Thanks, Ewan. That's great. Juliette, can you share examples of adjustments or supports that can really make a difference in a workplace setting?
Sure. So I've got 3 hours of material to get through in 3 minutes here. So I've made a list. I'm going to rip through the list. First of all, there's no magic cure. There's no one size fits all. It's about strategic implementation of strategies as necessary in your context. And then exercising them on a daily basis. So it's about consistency and habit forming. So some strategies could include, right, assimilation of heavy data sets if one is not in hyperfocus. If you're in hyperfocus, fine. If you're not, it may mean working in short bursts with alarm-regulated breaks. And those breaks should be quite specific, that we're looking at brain regulation during those breaks so you can go back in and start again. Precision under pressure requires self-regulation to be optimal, so creating working environments that have minimal interruptions, design clear goals with deadline checkpoints. Create your own dopamine. You can do this through your food choices, movement, as Ewan has explained, and how you speak to yourself as well. Be careful of your inner critic, because a lot of people with ADHD have very vicious inner critics, and that can also make you feel pretty awful. So a good strategy is, what am I actually saying to myself? AI can be added when designing strategies, which can add enormous support value. So options for hybrid cognitive sharing, apps regulation, reminders, adaptive nudges, scheduling organisers, breathing apps, ADHD psychoeducation apps, document summarizers, predictive analytics for claim interpretations, apps for CBT, regulation, overwhelm, goal tracking apps, and you can gamify progress as well and turn goals into a challenge. We really want to keep someone with ADHD in their window of tolerance. This is critical. We want to ensure that someone with ADHD is regularly checking in with themselves. Where am I at? If I'm not at a 5, I need to think, what was that trigger that just made me feel a bit stressed? We want to make sure we're always in our window of tolerance so that we don't get overwhelmed. So we're being preemptive with our strategies. All strategies really should be strategically preemptive. So we've sat down and we've thought things through as much as we can. We want to keep tasks linear as well. So we don't want them building up, because when they build up, they fall down on top of us. So we want to finish what we're supposed to be doing before we start something else. Deadline urgency mapping should be undertaken. Daily questions. Has this task been started? How is it going? Will it be completed by the designated date? If not, reframe it. Time to think things through. Being provided, for instance, with interview questions can help. Cyclic responses for people with ADHD. So initially they give that raw, unfiltered answer, and then they can refine if you allow them a bit more time. During onboarding, ensure multiple reflection moments so that you can keep asking, did you actually genuinely understand what I said? And people can say, yes, I did. If you haven't finished a task one day, make sure the next day you start with that task, because that saves you getting, things getting on top of you. Instructions being given clearly, one at a time. Where have you noted this information? Because people with ADHD, you can say something to them, it literally does go in through one ear and out the other. So where has that information been noted? Where have I stored it? But more importantly, I won't remember where I've stored it. So I need something else to remind me where I've stored the information that I actually need to remember. So don't be afraid of having multiple layers to remember really important information. How does it remain active? Flexible working hours, as Ewan suggested, are good. However, I want to caveat this, because if someone is not, like, they haven't really looked at their sleep hygiene, their diet, their exercise, what they're doing in their home. If you go and let someone work, I don't want to be awful here, but if you let someone work from home who hasn't got their ADHD at home under control, I'm afraid that probably their work may or may not be in control as well. So it's really, the onus is on, if you're going to work from home, make sure that your home is set up so that you can be as productive as possible, and that we don't want that collateral damage starting. Regular and smaller performance reviews are good for RSD, this rejection sensitive dysphoria. We don't want some great big performance review. We want small bits of information. And also, just to clarify, how do you feel about that? How did that constructive criticism go down, so that they're not then avoiding you the next 6 months when they see you in the corridor? Hydration break, something as simple as drinking water. Please remember to drink water. It really helps with cognitive function. We want to be planning our days. We get to work, we want to actually take time to plan, what do I actually have to do today and how am I going to achieve those goals? Do I need to develop incremental steps between task initiation and where that task needs to finish? So do I need to do a little bit more work in my planning? If you've been putting something off, I have a saying, it's just do it. Don't fall into the trap of thinking I need to be motivated in order to do that task. Because with an ADHD brain, you've got a problem that dopamine is that perceives reward in tasks. If I've got to take the garbage out, I can tell you my brain is never going to give me any sense of reward if I go and take the garbage out. So I'm just going to have to go and do it. So just do it. So make sure that there are certain, even at work, if you're not in hyperfocus and you've got data heavy analysis to do, your brain is never going to sit there and go, oh, good, I can't wait to do this. Great. You're going to have to say, I've just got to do this. And that builds resilience in the workplace. We want to have fidget toys, maybe cycling machines under the desk. Have we got desks for standing? Have we got music we can listen to? It's, even a pop plant can help, but that's up to you in terms of what you feel will help you during the day. Quiet zones are good. I've got to say that the handy toilet cubicle is really good for a 3-minute meditation, and that can regulate the brain. Reduce your visual clutter as well if necessary. And also outsource specialist guidance where necessary. If you need to really work with someone else and bring them in, do that, because once you understand ADHD, you can have these hacks, you can have this scaffolding, you can actually sort it out. And I think that's really important. Most importantly, stay on top of your work and don't accept a promotion unless you have discussed clear strategies as to how you will cope with a more complex and demanding role. And I really mean that, because I see so many people coming in and they've gone and taken that promotion and then they are in tears and they're sitting at home and they don't have a job anymore. So we want to avoid that at all costs. So be honest with yourself and your workplace will love you.
What a robust and comprehensive list. There's some tidbits for me to take away from that list for sure. Kim, we've got a lot of leaders in the room today and probably dialing in online. What are practical steps that they can take to create that sort of ADHD friendly workspace?
Yeah, so I think leaders, you're in a really powerful and important position to either help or hinder. And so again, I come back to how you manage each and every person should be different. Like there will be some consistencies, but really getting to know each and every staff member and creating that environment of psychological safety. I think sometimes showing some vulnerability as a leader, like you don't have to come in and talk about every trauma you've had with your direct reports. Like there's a limit to that authenticity, but admitting that you don't always have it all together. I think in sharing the appropriate amount of vulnerability, that then creates a psychological safety for your team members to feel like they can do that as well. I think clarity is the number one thing in my view that's really important with ADHD. So giving lots and lots of clarity, lots of space to ask, can I provide this information in a different way? Like, do you really have what I'm saying to you? Like, we can go through it again, creating that space. And it's hard. It's hard when you're time poor. As leaders, you've got 1,000,001 things to do. You've got your own deliverables, so sometimes I notice leaders, if they have a team member that they see as quite difficult or that it takes them more time to give instructions to that person, they might fall in the trap of actually just doing it themselves. And I think neurodivergence or not, every leader's been there. Sometimes I'll think it's just quicker to do it myself than to delegate, but you're not doing anyone any favors by doing that. So really putting aside that time, having the regular one-on-one catch-ups, and the rejection sensitivity is huge. So being mindful, if you just send a random email, I need to catch up with you for a chat later, to someone, well, to anyone really, and we've got a negativity bias, like, oh my God, you start running through, like, what have I done? What haven't I done? What's it going to be about? So that sort of clarity in saying, hello, I just wanted to catch up with you a bit later to talk about such and such. You've been doing a great job there. Just need to clarify a few points, is going to stop the person rocking in the fetal position in the toilets. Yeah. So just thinking about how you come across can be really powerful. And also knowing, like there's a saying, well, with autistic people, when you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Like everyone is different. So not assuming that just because someone does have ADHD that they're going to be this way or that way. We're all different. We all have different brains. So taking the time to really get to know each and every person, and also noting that ADHDers have so many wonderful strengths. I don't like the term superpowers. I don't know if you guys have heard that online. Oh, you know, ADHD is my superpower, because realistically, it can be really challenging. There's a higher rate of substance abuse and all kinds of things that come along with it, because unmanaged, it's really hard. But when you've got all of this stuff in place and you're in a workplace that supports you, some ADHDers I know are the most visionary, strategic, creative, amazing people. And I think most of my friends are actually ADHDers, not on purpose. Like I don't interview them, but we're just drawn to each other and the conversations are amazing, you know. So if I do say so myself, but you know, I think so if you're setting people up to do their best work, you're going to get some bloody brilliant things out of ADHDers and out of all these different brains. So it's just creating an environment for each and every person to flourish. Yeah.
Well said. We're going to throw to the audience now for some Q&A. So if you are dialing in at home, please drop your questions into the Q&A. For those in the room, Kayla's going to come around, I think, or no, maybe not. I've thrown Kayla under the bus. Lisa's coming around with the microphone. So if you just pop your hand up if you've got a question, and we'll go from there.
You spoke a lot about fatigue and burnout and the risks of that and exercise. How should people think about, you know, a lot of us work on global timelines, we have calls at all times of the day. How should we think about managing that or prioritizing that versus sleep?
Who wants to take that one?
Do you want me to have a crack at that?
Go for it, Ewan. Yeah.
So circadian physiology is a very interesting area. So in terms of time zones, what are the main, you have to consider. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with the term chronotype, but chronotype is our natural behavioral and genetic predisposition to be towards being an early morning person or a late night person. And being aware of that for yourself and for potential team members is one really important thing to keep in mind when you're trying to decide which way you want to try and shift your circadian phase, or even if it's just a one-off to have international meetings, because someone who is more has a later circadian phase, a later chronotype, will tend to operate better if you shift things later, whereas a morning chronotype, especially an early morning chronotype, will tend to handle shifting things earlier a little bit better. So that's one consideration right there as well. In terms of, you're talking about scheduling meetings sort of internationally, is there any particular countries you have in mind in terms of the time difference? US?
Pretty much the world, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And are there any particular aspects of it that you are sort of concerned about or that you're finding challenging?
It's more, you know, you wake up in the morning, your routine is exercise in the morning, but you're going to go to bed late because you've got a call late at night, right? What do you prioritize in the morning? Do you prioritize getting the extra sleep? Is that going to be better for you? Or do you prioritize the exercise? Is that going to be better for you?
This is a great question. So it depends on the nature of the cognitive task that you'll be doing. So throughout our sleep cycle, throughout the night, our sleep cycle shifts through. We go through stage 1, 2, 3, and we have the sort of lighter sleep. Then we have the deep non-REM sleep and then the REM sleep. For things like emotional regulation, higher order cognitive thought, thinking like that, the REM sleep is actually the most important. For basic brain functions and movement functions, our body prioritizes them earlier in our sleep cycle. And as we go through each stage, each 90-minute sleep cycle, the proportion of each type of sleep actually shifts to have more and more REM and deep sleep later in the night, right? So with the consideration of, do I stay up later? Do I wake up earlier? How do I figure it out? The key question you need to ask is, what is the nature of the demands of the call? If it's going to be involving conflict management or something that requires higher order cognitive thought, like creative thinking, things like that, then you want to actually not disrupt that later stages of sleep. Because if we normally go to sleep at 10 and we wake up at 6, say, even if you go to bed at 12, we still actually will shift more towards very quickly doing more of the REM sleep because we tend towards, if we have a regular sleep pattern, utilizing and shifting towards that. So if you have to do something that is more higher order cognitive thought, you generally want to actually go to bed a little bit later and wake up earlier, or wake up at the usual time. When it comes to the sort of physiology of when you should do the exercise, it's a question, this relates heavily, a very important point around flexible working arrangements. If you can get up earlier by a moderate amount, if you're getting up more than 2 hours earlier, wouldn't recommend it, because the loss in sleep and a full sleep cycle of heavy REM sleep is not ideal. But if it's a matter of getting up half an hour earlier, then that may be worth it. But it's generally better to have a natural wake out of a sleep cycle. So it's usually better to do the exercise after the meeting, the early morning meeting, if you have an early morning meeting. I hope that, does that make sense? Mostly?
That felt like a permission slip to sleep. Yeah,
feel free
that's
to
what
ask
I
clarifying
heard.
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, feel free to ask clarifying questions. I'm happy to chat with you about it afterwards as well.
Can I just jump in? I would say too, if I'm working with a client, even myself, sometimes I have stuff all over the place. Like my minimum for me to keep a fit cadence is 3 gym sessions a week. So I have my CEO hour like on a Sunday night, and I'll have a look at what I've got coming up during the week. And I live and die by my calendar, and I'll make sure I have those 3 sessions somewhere around what I have going on, which isn't connected to all of that.
No, but it's a very, it's actually an excellent point though, because it's something that I do with clients often is, okay, we're actually going to go into a calendar. We're going to go into a calendar right now and just block out, and it has to be something pretty extreme for you to change this. And you lock it in and be like, nothing can interrupt this time. Yes. You're locking in this exercise time. And that's actually an incredibly good approach as well. It's a very good strategy.
Can I just add also that if you're in a hotel room and you need to exercise, you can actually change the type of exercise too. So you could just do some push-ups and some squats. And so you can compromise. So if you're particularly tired, you can sleep, but then you can get up and maybe do a 7-minute, high intensity training as well. So you can be flexible depending on how you're feeling. So that might be something to add as well.
Steering away from all or nothing.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Taylor, do we have any online questions?
I was going to ask one though.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you for sharing. I feel very seen personally, actually, which has been great hearing from you. Kim, your late diagnosis was a catalyst for creating NeuroAmp.
Yeah.
Working with organisations to try and create this inclusive, psychologically safe environment. What's been some of the key barriers from some of those organisations to really try and help them overcome their thinking around this being a negative versus a positive?
So many. Well, we had the lovely CEO that I mentioned the other week, so that was a hard stop in the conversation. I think it's generally either fear about how big it's going to be to have these discussions, not wanting to say the wrong thing. Like we did a poll on our LinkedIn company page the other day, and that was the biggest thing, like you don't want to say the wrong thing. And it's difficult because I've even noticed on LinkedIn, which is meant to be a lovely supportive place, but people getting upset about the use of neurodivergence versus neurodiversity, and people using the term neurodiversity to refer to an individual. I was like, calm down, at least we're having the discussion. And I think it makes people shy away from talking about this stuff. And so I think normalizing that and initially doing education, like this is amazing, you're making it accessible. You guys are coming along, now you can take this back, and knowing that we're never going to get it right all the time. Like diversity and inclusion generally involves a whole lot of topics that can be fraught, and that we're not going to get it right all the time, but we need to keep having the conversation. I think some organisations are nervous about doing anonymous surveys because they're worried about what will come out. And then some leaders are very good at saying, oh, well, that wasn't referring to me, like it's referring to somewhere else, like not wanting to take accountability. And the final one would be values. So organisational values, there's a difference between having them on the fridge and you ask any staff member, what are the values of the organisation? I don't know. But if you're really living those values, so I think doing that work as an organisation and how are we living and breathing our values behaviourally, that can be an important piece of the puzzle as well. But it's a work in progress. I'm sure you guys are too, really excited that it's becoming more part of the mainstream discussion now. And I think there's really good times ahead. So let's keep it going.
So that's all we have time for today, folks. I just want to extend a huge thank you to our wonderful panelists for such an engaging and thought-provoking discussion today. It's been wonderful I've taken so much away from listening to you all. We'd love to hear your key takeaways from today's session. If you want to share any insights or pics on LinkedIn, we encourage you to do so. Tag us in, #Dive2025. And if you'd like to learn any more about the panelists, we have a slide on the screen that has all their details. So this concludes the session today. Thanks so much for joining us and for dialing in for those at home.